The rise and fall of the Roman Empire. A village, a river, and an absurd amount of confidence. Hey guys, tonight we begin one of the longest, strangest, and most surprisingly dramatic stories in human history. So dim the lights. Put your phone face down, find the cool side of the pillow, and settle in. Because tonight we're drifting back more than 2,000 years to a world of dusty roads, wandering shepherds, ambitious kings, and one tiny settlement that somehow convinced itself it deserved to rule everybody. And to be fair, eventually it did. The Roman Empire is one of those subjects that feels almost too big to comprehend. It lasted for centuries. It covered enormous territories. It produced emperors, philosophers, generals, engineers, politicians, saints, criminals, and more than a few individuals who probably should not have been trusted with sharp objects. But every giant story has a beginning, and Rome's beginning was surprisingly humble. No marble palaces, no massive arenas, no legions marching beneath golden banners, just a few hills beside a river, and some people trying to survive. As we slowly wander into ancient Italy, the year is somewhere around the 8th century BCE. The Italian peninsula is not united. There is no Italy. There is certainly no Roman Empire. Instead, there are dozens of small communities scattered across hills and valleys. Farmers work fields, shepherds guide flocks, merchants travel difficult roads. Life is simple and often difficult. The future rulers of the Mediterranean are, at this point, mostly concerned with not starving, which is generally a reasonable priority. Near the Tiber River sit several hills. These hills provide protection. The river offers water and trade, and gradually people begin settling there. Among these hills is one that will become famous, the Palatine Hill. Future emperors will build palaces there. Future historians will write books about it. Future tourists will take photographs there. At the moment, however, it is mostly dirt, grass, and a collection of modest huts. Greatness often starts with surprisingly unimpressive real estate. Now, if you ask the Romans how their city began, they would tell you a much more exciting story. Naturally, ancient civilizations rarely brag about having been founded by ordinary farmers. The Romans preferred something more dramatic. According to legend, Rome was founded by twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. The story begins with betrayal, as many ancient stories do. A wicked king steals power, a royal family is threatened, infants are placed in danger. Eventually, the twins are abandoned near the Tiber River. Things are looking rather grim. Then a she-wolf appears. Yes, a wolf. And according to the legend, this wolf nurses the children and keeps them alive, which is certainly one solution to the childcare problem. The boys survive, grow stronger, learn their true heritage, and eventually decide to found a city. Unfortunately, they immediately begin arguing over where the city should go. Brothers have been doing this for thousands of years, only usually with fewer consequences. The disagreement escalates. Romulus kills Remus, and Romulus becomes the founder of Rome. It is not exactly a heartwarming beginning, but it does establish an important Roman tradition, political disagreements becoming surprisingly personal. Whether the story is true is another matter entirely. Most historians doubt it, but the legend mattered. Romans believed it connected them to destiny, to divine favor, to something larger than themselves. And civilizations often draw strength from the stories they tell. Meanwhile, the actual settlement continued growing. Families arrived, trade expanded, the population increased. What had once been scattered communities slowly began becoming something larger. Rome occupied a useful location. Merchants passed through. Goods moved along the river. Opportunities multiplied. Little by little, the settlement became a town, then a city, and eventually something far more ambitious. Early Rome was ruled by kings, at least according to Roman tradition. Several kings supposedly governed the city during its formative years. Some were remembered as builders, others as warriors. A few acquired reputations that grew steadily larger with every generation that retold the stories. Ancient history has a habit of collecting dramatic embellishments. It's one of its hobbies. One of the most influential neighboring peoples were the Etruscans. Today they receive far less attention than they probably deserve. The Etruscans occupied much of central Italy. They possessed sophisticated cities, advanced craftsmanship, and extensive trade networks. In many ways, they were more developed than early Rome. The Romans borrowed heavily from them architecture, religion, engineering techniques, political symbols. When Rome later became famous, it rarely advertised just how much inspiration had come from its neighbors. Successful civilizations occasionally enjoy taking credit for group projects. For centuries, Rome remained relatively small, important locally, not important globally. No one in distant Greece was losing sleep over Rome. No one in Egypt was nervously checking maps. The city was simply one community among many. But that was beginning to change. As Rome expanded, it encountered rivals. Nearby communities competed for land, resources, influence. And when ancient societies competed, diplomacy often lasted only until somebody picked up a spear. The Romans developed a reputation, persistence. They lost battles, then came back, lost again, returned again, failed repeatedly, continued anyway. If determination alone could conquer continents, Rome was already halfway there. Eventually, tensions grew between Rome's kings and many of the city's elite families. According to tradition, the final king became increasingly unpopular, arrogant, authoritarian, difficult, the sort of ruler who could enter a room and somehow lower morale immediately. In 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown. The Romans established something new, a republic, and this would change everything. No longer would kings rule Rome, at least officially. Instead, elected officials and governing institutions would share authority. The system was complicated, very complicated. There were assemblies, magistrates, senators, consuls, committees, laws, traditions, and endless debates. The Romans essentially created a government structure capable of generating paperwork before paper was even common. Yet despite its complexity, the Republic proved remarkably durable. Not perfect, far from it, but effective, especially for a city determined to expand, and Rome was becoming increasingly determined. As the centuries passed, Roman armies pushed outward. Neighboring territories were conquered, alliances formed, enemies defeated, roads constructed. The city grew richer, stronger, more confident, possibly too confident, though that particular problem would emerge later. For now, Rome was still climbing, still growing, still imagining what it might become. And as the sleepy sun sets over the hills of ancient Italy tonight, a former village beside a river is beginning a journey that will eventually reshape the known world. The people living there cannot see the future. They cannot imagine emperors, or colosseums, or armies marching across continents. They do not know their descendants will one day govern millions. For now, they simply build, trade, argue, farm, and dream, which is how many extraordinary stories begin. And in the next part, Rome will begin expanding beyond its neighbors, encountering powerful enemies and discovering that conquering Italy is only the first step towards something much larger. A great republic is rising, and it has absolutely no intention of staying small.